Welcome to the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast. I am the curator, Garrett Chaffin-Quiray. Today we have a conversation with a friend.
This is Ed Rosa, bon vivant, professional simpleton, and you can check out my and our work on youtube.com at Toothless Richard Productions. This is Gateway Cinema, Episode 4, Emotional Realism, Part 1, and we're talking about Come and See.
Movies bind people together. Theaters do this by forcing people to sit in neat rows that face a wall-sized screen. Movies projected onto those screens further develop the bond among audience members by providing emotional focal points. Connection is therefore the method through which individuals experience movies within a group. Yet, the connections people make based on what's projected on screen can remain with them long after a movie is finished. These ties work on behalf of movies to enhance the appetite for still more movies with a kind of pleasure that is, for many, addictive. Most importantly, these ties help people get along because they share a common experience. For some of us, movies strike at the core of what we're all about in the way that I know religiosity appeals to those who go to church or temple or go to forests out in wonderful primordial earth. It's a way to get to the big spirits, the big powers. We're looking for triggering experiences, whether characters, actions, plot lines, settings, backdrops, props, whatever, that cause us to really feel strongly about something. And where this becomes particularly acute, we don't demand that that great feeling is truthful, based on documentary evidence of the world as lived.
Right.
It can be totally fantastic, but we want feeling.
Right.
That is the nature of going to the show. Some people prefer that kind of feeling to be given them through music, through poetry readings, through exercise. All legitimate. But we are movie guys.
Yes.
And so emotional realism is meant to convey that deep, resonant sense of the human condition through something that you experience, while also realizing most stuff we watch in movie land will never, ever get to that kind of depth. And I think what we've arrived at by focusing our attention on Come and See is a complete throwdown into art cinema, into the exploration of soul through a very brutal thing. It's hard to imagine that we can turn a new leaf in what the World War II experience can be on a movie screen. And while this movie itself is 40 years old, this is 1985 when it is released in Moscow only at a film festival.
Right.
It definitely took a leaf I had not been prepared to examine, flipped it over and went, let's gouge you in the eyes. It is the story of a 14-year-old Belarusian boy as he meets various people, forms allies, tries to feed himself. These little vignettes in the life of Fyodor, played by Alexei Kravchenko, who realizes the war has swept through his country, that the Germans, the Nazis, are bad people, and he wants to go to war to fight on behalf of people like him. Villagers in the hinterland of the greater Russian experience, but here in Belarus.
Yeah, partisans they were, because they weren't like officially military, I think.
And they're not particularly trained. He has to bring his own weapon, and he manages to dig up a rifle that's been left behind on a battlefield and some bullets that arms him enough. From that point, he goes through an ever-extending set of horrors, especially when he finally does confront the Germans, which roll up every last idealism youth could have about saving the country land, saving the fatherland, saving the motherland. And it concludes then with this sort of baffling but also really thrilling excitement. He confronts his own killing energy and finds a portrait of young Adolf Hitler in his mother's arms, shoots it a bunch of times, and then on screen we watch a backwards-fed set of newsreels of Adolf Hitler's career as an adult working back through World War II's various episodes of increasing German power in the 1930s, long before this Belarusian story that we're talking about commences, because he realizes even the Führer was a baby. I left the movie really profoundly aware that there isn't much of a plot. The story is inconclusive.
It's like Drum. It's an open text. We don't know what's going to happen next.
And on top of that, there is this statement on screen that there were, I think, 628 villages that were systematically exterminated by the Germans as they advanced through the Belarusian countryside to do war with the Red Army. And 628, as I was thinking about it, is not a lot, but then a village could be 50 people, it could be 1,000.
Right.
You multiply it out, we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of people ritualistically exterminated in its own form of Shoah. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that before in our times talking about Shoah. Laying these things in my cards on the table, let me also further say, I did no research on what this movie was about. I just took the copy that you offered me to go home and watch it, and watched it, only knowing the lobby art, which is a boy with a gun held to his head. That's sort of disarming. And then hearing various of our friends here at your home talking about it, because I think you had hosted a screening at some point when we were just getting to be friends. And everybody sort of chattering about how difficult and unpleasant it was. And I thought, difficult, unpleasant. Yeah,
right.
Chat. I want that. That's
speaking my language.
I need that sometimes. And tying that into this lesson on emotional realism, that there are spots where we lean into what the screened entertainment can be, the screened art, because it really makes us feel things, sometimes good things, love, and how to portray that with our beloved. But sometimes horrible things. This movie's that. This is horrible things that I didn't know I was going to visit with because I did no research. And by the end, you're thinking, oh, I visited horrible things. Yeah. I can't unsee some of the horror.
Why did I do this?
Yeah. So
but that's the best way. Honestly, I abolish trailers. The best way to watch something is just sight unseen. You did the right thing, not looking into this first.
Take me back to your experience learning about this movie and seeing it, and then recommending it to me. So here we are.
Our favorite local art house cinema, the beloved Ken.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Yeah. It's a tragedy, a true tragedy for all of San Diego. They were going to close down, and they did. So they booked this week of films to say goodbye, and then some benefactor swooped in. I don't think it was Quentin Tarantino. Some benefactor swooped in with money to save the Ken, so it staved off its demise for a while. But then it happened again. Now, in anticipation of, because I think Janus or Criterion was going to do a Blu-ray release of it. This is 2019, I think, or the very beginning of 2020. So what they'll do is like the 4K restoration or whatever, right? And then they'll trot it out. They'll put it on tour through art houses around the country for a little bit, and then the Blu-ray will come out. One of the farewell screenings that the Ken was holding was this, and I had never heard of this. And so not having heard of this one, instantly I'm like, well, I'm going to this. And then I did end up reading a little more about it, and that's when, because you read kind of all the same stuff, it's like, oh my God, it's so ruthless and rough and, this harrowing experience. So, and then COVID happened and shut everything down, which ended instantly the farewell screenings at the Ken, and they just closed their doors. So then the Blu-ray came out, and I just bought it sight unseen. Very shortly thereafter, I'm like, I got to sit down. I got to watch this. I got to know what this is about. And that's how I saw it the first time. And then I started sort of spreading the gospel.
For me, part of this movie is attached to the Soviet filmmakers that emerged largely in the 70s and established a reputation as these bristly artists inside of the Soviet system who were subject to extreme measures of state censorship and limitation, but still found little pockets of resistance through the choices they would make on the genres they would explore. Or in the example of this movie, I think the years it took to finally get enough support and be allowed to make it. I read after the fact that it took something like 8 or 10 years to have the permission.
Yeah, he had Elim Klimov, right, the director. I mean, it's not dogmatically pro-Russia, but it's certainly not. It certainly doesn't really expose.
It doesn't say that they're flawed.
Right. As far as I could tell, it doesn't take something like Paths of Glory, where we're with the French army in World War I, but the story is about this corruption, I guess, within the side that we're on.
Right.
It's very
critical of the leadership class and the
right.
poor man on the front line.
Right. Whereas this, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be that way. And in fact, really, in a way, you could look at it like, man, this thing is just a tribute to, the hardiness of, like, the Russian people.
That's largely how I read it, despite my own sort of intensely overwhelming negative and sad feelings.
Right.
It definitely is that. Like, these partisans are truly brave people.
Absolutely.
And they have a real reason to participate in resistance because of the extermination of their fellow person.
Yeah.
Which is devastating and awful to behold once we finally get there.
Right, right.
A few details that I turned up. The production companies named in the credits for this in various sources include Belarus Film and Mosfilm. That's the Belarusian film national body sponsored by the government, and the same for Russia.
Yeah.
Those two bodies are what participated in funding this thing and helping this thing once all of the various green lights were lit so Klimov could make this thing go. I highlight that because as this movie progresses, we steadily have a larger and larger cast. All of those people had to be fed on set. They had to control road access. They had to control background noises. They had to control an awful lot to make it true. And even if it wasn't expensive, maybe people were told, you got to go make a movie today or you got to go work in the warehouse. I guess I'll make a movie today, then go, whatever the state controls were.
Right.
A lot of bodies were there and a lot of resources. We see materiel that seems appropriate to 43. The half-tracks, the trucks, all of the weaponry, the costumes, the helmets, all of the stuff. It looks correct. I could determine no budget for what this movie cost. None has been published to the best of my research, which is limited by the fact I don't speak Russian. I can't read Cyrillic and all of the rest. It's just to say that there was real resource put behind this movie, even if it was just, in quotes, just human resource. Still, that's something. And it was state-sanctioned, which is something when we're still behind the wall. This is before the Cold War concluded.
Oh, yeah. No, this is the height of it, really. I mean, this is the time when, one of my biggest fears, other than sinking on the Titanic, was being bombed.
By the Ruskies.
By the Ruskies, yeah, totally.
And the distributor for this movie, when it was finally done, was Sovexport Film, which is the distribution arm of the national sort of film apparatus, which involves, I think, a film school with several locations, control of the facilities, control of the celluloid, and all of that stuff. Probably chemical companies that run all the compounds to make the stuff develop, etc., etc. This is an unusual movie that way. Ultimately state-sanctioned, ultimately not critical of the state, but ultimately extraordinarily weird, vicious, and difficult. It doesn't affirm an obvious message of, look at us, we are great. It's not patriotic like that.
No, even you could, as I've done, you can kind of infer that a bit as we, talked about sort of the bravery, I guess, of the citizens that form their own, militias to combat this invading force. But it's never, ever self-congratulatory in that way.
And a lot of the partisan adults that he meets and throws down with, they're disreputable, difficult people. They're unlikable. Most of them are, because of the nature of who they are in time and in space, they're largely an unwashed peasantry of farmers and people who live very close to the earth. A lot of this movie is spent rooting around in dirt, little more than a quadruped, like a pig might. There's a lot of filth in this. There's a lot of being covered in filth to hide oneself. There's a lot of natural world observation, plants, birds, winningly and devastatingly, a cow at a certain point. It's just to say these aren't people in cities talking about the big ideas of statecraft. These are people who are worried about feeding themselves, feeling in danger constantly, and not knowing who to trust. And that includes their fellow partisans. They sometimes don't like each other or get along very well. They argue and bicker. These are not affirmative messages about the homeland.
Right.
So I can see why it took a while to knock down the obstacles by Klimov until finally he had permission to make this thing. But once he does, once you experience it, you think, this is a weird coming-of-age movie.
Yeah. It's funny, I think one of the trivia items on IMDb, I forget who said it, but they said it's possibly the worst date movie ever. It was released in the USA on February 6th, 8 days before Valentine's Day.
Right.
That's what I'm going to do for Valentine's Day. I'm going to take my date to see Come and See.
Well, thinking about that context, there's a key text that was also on the loose in America at that time, also anti-war, also critical, also realistic, and that was Oliver Stone's eventual Academy Award winner, Platoon.
Yeah.
That was doing huge business for months, and I place that in front of you to have a quick sidebar and say that that's a movie my parents took me to go see because that was the big experience of their youth. The Vietnam War divided them from their parents, divided some siblings and in-laws from one another. Mm-hmm. Seeing Chris, played by Charlie Sheen, go off to the NAM as a Marine Corps enlistee. And it's a difficult movie to deal with. Mm-hmm. In the end, it's much more on the nose with giving you its themes through voiceover. It tells you what you're to experience and what you're to think.
I think that's kind of Oliver Stone's MO a little bit. I mean, he kind of sort of beats you over the head a little bit. And
at the age of 13, seeing it in that circumstance with all of those frames of reference, I get to go to an R-rated movie with my parents, but it's a really disturbing R-rated movie, and I don't like how I feel. I don't like how I feel next to my parents while watching. All of that stuff. But you are given, this is the guide. Chris tells us, because Oliver Stone wrote the script, to say, this is what you need to know. It's about bad dads. Mm-hmm. It's about making better choices for the future.
Right.
Come and See does not offer this.
No.
It just stops. With that out of the way, what are the moments in this that stick to the ribs? What makes this movie emotionally realistic?
Besides just the disturbing nature of the whole thing and the fact that it's utterly believable, there's a moment when one of the Nazis says to the people trapped in the barn...
Oh, and they've been literally rounded up like livestock.
Yeah, herded up,
herded into the barn, the biggest building in the middle of this small village. Mm-hmm. Everybody.
Right, they're all stuffed in there.
Everybody. And they're stuffed. I mean, they're having a hard time moving. Mm-hmm. It's not unlike those train cars in Shoah.
Right, exactly. And then one of the guys goes and he tells them, hey, anybody that'll leave your children in there, you can go. A woman tries to hand her very young child, probably a toddler. It's not like a baby, but I think he's
not walking is my estimate.
Right,
a little one.
She tries to hand him out the window to, the guy or whatever to get him out of there, and this guy just shoves the baby back in.
But takes her out.
Right, and the roughness with which he shoves the kid back in the window, the seeming severity of the performance, that really stuck with me.
Well, and what's going to happen is that barn is going to be set fire.
Naturally, as the building burns, they start trying to force the door to get out, and I'm like, they're just going to shoot you.
And that's exactly what happened.
Right. From the same scene, there's a... And
it's a long scene. It takes a while to work this thing out.
Oh, yeah. And interestingly, it's so funny because the day before rewatching this, I had just taken my old man to see the new 4K restoration of Akira Kurosawa's Ron, which is the second time I've seen it now in its rotation. And I just thought it was really crazy that I would inadvertently watch two movies 2 days in a row that both came out in 1985. They're both in foreign languages, and they both have this huge structure that burns down. And you only get one take because the building's actually burning.
That's right.
That's just a weird side note.
Detail to add to that: there are flamethrowers.
Oh, yeah.
Soldiers walking around I wasn't prepared for how fast the flame is.
Yeah.
I've seen those in other American movies, and probably the technology is different from country to country. But it's really remarkable, because they want a Molotov cocktail at first, but it's not fast enough.
Right.
So then you just bring out the flame launchers. Yeah. Right.
There's so in that same scene, there's this part where when the Nazis are preparing to move on to the next village, presumably, they're dragging some poor girl into the back of their truck.
It's the mother whose child they threw away. They've kept her to be a sex slave.
Right, and I'm like, that poor girl is going to be raped literally to death. But then later, she reemerges after they're finished with her, and that's pretty disturbing when you just get this. Because one of the things that Klimov does in this, the close-ups.
Yeah.
It's like he really wants you to feel that terror. You get this close-up of this woman after she has just been
gang raped for hours.
To hell and back. And she's got some kind of a whistle, but her eyes, like, she's gone.
Right. It's really disturbing.
Yeah.
And the reason why our lead escapes is he volunteers himself. He has no child, so he climbs out the window.
Right.
When she's trying to help her baby escape, the baby's thrown back and she's harvested.
Right. And even some of, like, the one moment that was just really brilliant when Fliora and Glasha go, when he takes her back to his village, he's like, oh, and there's, like, still dinner or whatever.
Right, we'll go eat and we'll rest and we've...
And then when they take off and they're running away and Fliora doesn't notice, but Glasha looks behind her and sees the corpses of the entire village just piled up against the back of one of their, one of these structures, one of these houses.
I think it's the back of Fliora's house.
Okay, yeah, right.
But he doesn't look back because he's running into the woods to go find the other partisans, presuming that his village is with them.
With them,
yeah.
Right. And it's not, like, exploitative or anything. Like, we don't get, like, close-ups of bodies or...
But they're piled like sticks.
But you get, like, just enough of them. The dark, sinister nature of this thing really kind of hits home, and then, which is then followed by this scene where, he's trying to crawl through this bog, this mud, and he can barely do it, and she's screaming and crying, and he's screaming and crying, and then they get out, and then she's, like, yelling at him, like, they're dead, they're all dead, and he's, and then he attacks her because he's losing it, and that whole thing was really pretty intense. But I thought it was an exceptional choice, just the way you just kind of just see them while we're still moving. We don't stop. We don't linger. We don't have time for that. Even the cow. Because, it's like, I'm like, oh, no.
So 2 technical things that I noticed and I think created some of my response. One is that this is both 40 years ago and in another country with different expectations for safety, but they're shooting live rounds.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they talked about that. They
strafe that cow on an open field with live machine gun fire, and it's only through luck, planning, and rehearsal that the kid gets below the firing line to himself not have his head blown off.
Right.
And we watch this pitiful animal, shot perhaps a dozen times, fall down lowing, eyes rolling back, dying right before our eyes.
Right.
And then it becomes a prop upon which he falls asleep because he's so exhausted. That's extraordinary. Other sequences, there's artillery rounds that blow up whole trees.
The power of those explosions really comes through.
So we, as the camera, move through whole pieces of this as the stand-in for Fliora's perspective, as he meets other partisans, as he goes through this particular obstacle, as he deals with this field, or goes through this house, or whatever it might be. We are him. And characters address him, which means they're looking right at us.
Yeah, we get a lot of direct address.
Yeah, and it's unsettling.
Yeah.
One example of where this is very specifically unsettling, when Floria and Glasha make it through that bog you referred to, they do stumble upon the other partisans who've assembled in this odd forest. At the center of them is this man, the village elder, who they all kind of consider something of an idiot, but he's the village elder. He's been burned alive, covered in gasoline, and set fire.
It's the old man from the beginning that tells him, like, when him and that other kid are digging in the beach for guns. He's like, stop that digging.
Right.
It's him.
Okay, it's bad. Okay, yeah. Right. So this elder who's got this voice of wisdom or of reason or whatever, he's been burned alive. He's dying, lying flat, being fanned by some of the women nearby. But we see the terrible damage. And it's direct address. He's talking to our lead, remembering that detail from earlier in the movie, which I temporarily just forgot.
Right.
But it adds this greater impact, because he's talking right to us. It's in close-up, right there in front of this man who is rapidly dying from being doused with gasoline and burned alive by the Germans. That's a signal of how awful this is. If the pile of dead villagers a moment ago wasn't enough, here is a doubled detail. We're still some distance away from that murdered cow. We're still some distance away from some firefights. And we're well away from that burning village, which is sort of the ultimate piece of this movie. But that's all coming. An additional point, and this has to do with my training of watching just a handful of other Soviet-era movies. Here I'm thinking of Solaris.
Right.
There is a way that the really, I want to say clever, thoughtful, provocative, and true artists among the Soviet filmmakers used the lack of material resources, the lack of money, to be very thoughtful with choices they would make about nonetheless exploring unusual things. In Solaris, it's how do you create a space station when you're restricted to just some backlots in Moscow.
Right.
Where that plays a role here, although they had explosions, although they had open weaponry, they were shooting live rounds, they also had recordings of that. Mm-hmm. So there's at least one scene I'm thinking of where Florian and a few older guys are asked to go out and find some supplies to feed the villagers.
And this is where they take that effigy of Hitler
off into the woods to try to go steal some things. And they get caught by an entrenched group of machine gunners, Germans, who are defending whatever supplies they've got, who fire across the field at them. We don't see muzzle blasts. We don't see ricochet. We don't see poofs of dirt.
Right.
We hear it.
Right.
And they respond by running away, which is clever.
Yeah.
We don't need to see all of that. We can hear it because a recording is a lot cheaper, especially if you just bootleg it from something.
Right.
It's a thoughtful use of a practical effect with people reacting to it like it's true. Mm. And when that's done well, as it is in that example, it carries some real weight.
Yeah.
The actors really can perform this as a filmmaker yourself. You don't have the $100 million to do X. You got $100 to do Y.
Right.
Well, how can we approximate the scope of what we're trying
Right.
to accomplish
Right.
with something that's clever is the word I want to use. And I think it is clever to do that. When I did some research following the screening, I uncovered just a few details. I didn't go too deep on it, but the credited writers are Ales Adamovich and Elem Klimov, our filmmaker, Elem Klimov. And this was developed from Adamovich's novels, which he had written as a child who went into the partisan war force during World War II and experienced some of the things that he wrote about in at least two books, Katyn and I Am from the Fiery Village,
Right.
published in the 1970s, which made his reputation at that point emerging into the early stages of his middle age, becoming an important voice of his generation, especially because he was willing to speak to the war experience, which helped define his little corner of the Russian Empire, which didn't give up and become its own independent nation until the fall of the wall, which wasn't until, 1990 or so.
Yeah.
Belarus is a new place, geopolitically, but an old place, thinking about the world that Russia has had dominion over for so many hundreds of years. And it becomes then this playground, if that makes some sense, this playground of great empires at war with one another. Mm-hmm. Another thing to note about this movie, and I assume it was shot roughly on location, I'm used to seeing Russian movies about Russia in the winter.
It's Russian winters are what stopped both Napoleon and Hitler.
Yeah,
I mean,
snow.
they're Siberia,
snow.
right?
Right?
I mean, like, other than, like, the North Pole or the South Pole, I can't think of a colder place on Earth.
And this is an environment that seems cold because everybody is wearing
yeah.
layers and jackets, but it's green and lush with pine forests, and it looks like it looks like what I think Belarusia is in the world of today, and that is, along with Ukraine, kind of a breadbasket. Mm-hmm. Many things grow there, many crops.
It's a good farming
grow
land,
there. Right.
It looks like.
And so that makes it a valuable place, but it's not, at least in the depiction of this movie, and maybe it's true today, it's not a heavily populated place, and it's not an urban place. It is rural. Maybe nature on a leash. So we're watching these people traipse across large fields, getting caught in runoff water from a flash flood, from a rainstorm or whatever, but it's quite beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what makes this, it supercharges this movie in some ways.
There are these moments of beauty that interestingly contrast the sort of darkness. We're capable of so much misery, but then we also are capable of, like, just these tremendous, beautiful achievements.
The whole movie rests on Alexei Kravchenko, who plays Fliora. I suppose at this point in time he must be a little older than we are, probably in his middle 50s, I'm guessing. And this kid, man, they put him through paces.
Yeah, I know, dude. They put the screws to this kid, man.
Just the difficulty of being outside. There really are very few indoor scenes, and the indoor scenes that we do experience, they are not insulated.
No,
they're cabins.
Right, they're just under a roof.
Right.
They're not really indoors.
But much of it is under the sky. It's in the rain. It's under the baking sun. We watch his skin weather through being exposed to the elements.
We watch him age.
And I sort of feel like his eyes grow wider and wider, and he speaks less and less. All of these are things I have read, are the codes of somebody who's been dealt deep trauma.
Yeah, he's got the 1,000-yard stare.
Right. He gets there pretty fast, and it only deepens. So by the end of this thing, he's got a 10,000-yard stare, it seems to me.
Right.
And I know that's playing fast and loose with the truth of how people who experience war tragedies do live onward. But this boy really does bring the weight of a terrific performance, which I think partly is how he was built, being emotionally open as a young person, being capable of not looking in the camera when he's not supposed to, of running around in his costume, trying to figure out what's going on in the way the character's supposed to. And I'll bet that's how Klimov kept him at a distance and directed him, to force him into hardship and difficulty.
Well, they were really worried about it. From what I read, they were afraid they were going to just totally destroy this kid psychologically. So there were measures on set to help keep him
calmer and sane.
Yeah, because he was really doing this stuff. Like you said, one of those bullets missed him by inches or something like that.
Where his performance becomes particularly acute and memorable, and this has to do with that underlying idea, emotional realism. And naive Garrett several days ago, who hadn't seen the movie but only knew the poster art, it's the gun to the forehead. When we get to that scene in the movie, it happens after Fliora has volunteered. I got no kids, and crawls out of the barn.
Right.
He doesn't get to leave. They just hem him in a smaller circle of people, including the young woman whose baby was thrown back into the barn, and this man he's a Jewish publisher, I think it was, beneath a half-track with various soldiers, rifles on them. And there's this idle while they just sit there for a little while. Nothing's quite happening. Then one of the leaders, an officer class kind of a person, grabs him roughly by the ruff of his neck and pulls him over, puts his pistol to his forehead to take a picture with his squad.
Right. And they're all smiling, and just the look of horror on Fliora's face.
And it cuts between a close-up of direct address to a long shot of the setup, to a cross-cut to the photographer fumbling with the camera. And the photographer is just a line soldier with a point she's got a crank, and he's hoping to get the light right. I think they do 2 or 3 shots, and they keep roughing up his head a little bit to get the gun just right, and they keep telling each other how to pose and look meaner and tougher. This is our trophy of the war. Right. This is going to be our memory of this day.
Right.
This glorious day when we were doing the actions of our country.
Which is actually kind of an interesting sort of mirror to the photo that is taken at the beginning of the film, when all the partisans are sort of gathering, and Fliora's still in his big, he's in this suit that's too big for him.
With this new rifle that he's learned to clean.
Hat, right, and he's smiling. And then the guy, who's taking the photographer, posing people and trying to make it awesome. And
it's understandable. The image, this is going to become it's a synecdoche of the whole experience. But he's under a gun, under threat of death, and he knows they mean harm to everybody.
Right.
And then, unexpectedly, they finish the shot, the pistol's holstered, and the soldiers just leave him on his knees, quivering with fear.
Yeah.
An incredible moment. And so this young man, not even manhood yet, really does bring a level of performance right there.
Yeah.
It was wow.
His performance is remarkable. At no point do you ever get the feel like there's anything artificial happening.
And also, there's no cutaway to a stateroom where the military leaders are like, let's go do this thing. None of that happens. And because he's a child in the middle of this desperate situation with no access to a greater context, we are given none either. We are restricted to the limitations of this boy who's just trying to make tomorrow happen. That's all he's really trying to do after a point of initial excitement. And he's very good at registering on his face, I don't get it!
Right.
And he's not given to monologues. It's not done that way.
No.
It's just a lot of actions that happen around him. and he's able to react very well. The movie is in a squarish aspect ratio, so you're not looking left to right. It's
I think it's like 4:3 or...
I think it's right. It's relatively plain, and that's something that I'm sure was a restriction of the kind of film stock that they could use. It doesn't have any big editorial tricks, except for the reverse action newsreel footage at the end of the sort of surreal, backwards in time Hitler's life kind of thing that we get.
This is a facet of World War II that at least we in America don't get a lot of.
And like the movie Shoah, this is about a very specific slaughter. Shoah is not a portrait of the Shoah. It's a portrait of a few months in the life of Auschwitz against the people who could still talk about it, having survived it or having persecuted it or having taken the possession of those who died. I'm imagining that this kind of a story could be told in Ukraine, could be told in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Americans were not there, therefore Americans can't know what this is until the Russians and Belarusians tell the story, maybe even the Germans too, if they're feeling courageous now, the years later, to discuss what went on. When those bits of history are peeled back to give me a fuller portrait of what happened in the past that I felt I was knowledgeable of, it helps me understand what a just gross ignoramus I am.
Yeah, right.
And I take some solace from that. I don't mind being called on my ignorant tendencies, because now I have some wisdom I can fill in those gaps and be less sure of myself. And that's okay.
Yeah.
To plant it back in the middle 1980s and to place it in that context of Platoon, defining what things were going to be about. And the following year, at least in America, Full Metal Jacket shows up.
Yeah.
And sort of in the middle mix of all that, you get things like Hamburger Hill. Yeah. These are focused on the Vietnam
of war.
Right. They're Vietnam War experiences, because that was still the digestive problem of American life in the 1980s.
It wasn't really talked about for a certain amount of time, and then all of a sudden I feel like, okay, Vietnam's no longer off limits.
42 years after the events this movie is describing, which is when this comes out in 1985, maybe among the Belarusian class of people in global Earth, they could finally reconcile these experiences a little bit and share them. Which is to say, this memorializes something truly dreadful about modern civilization's backwater that we don't give a lot of attention to. The extermination of innocent people in their villages by a professionalized military willing to pull all stops and kill them because that was the rules of engagement from their point of view.
Yeah.
When that scene, the village destruction, is coming, when they're being herded into the barn, I was having a glimmer in my mind to a more recent movie also about World War II, and that was Atonement. Joe writes...
yes. I've actually read the book.
It's a big book and it's a big movie. There's a terrific scene in that. It's all single take. It's a masterful scene with thousands of extras, all playing soldiers who are stuck on the beach needing to be gotten off the beach. It was one of the big boat lift things of World War II. We have this played out in Dunkirk as well, but from a different perspective. Nonetheless, Robbie, one of our point of view characters, is wandering around this beach among this host of soldiers who are doing all kinds of things, from drunken bacchanalia, sunbathing, beating each other up, playing music, sleeping, all of the things that the human condition can do when there's a respite from active fighting. And when this village is contained by this set of German soldiers who are pros, they're all equipped, they got all this weaponry, all of these tools. Yeah. It felt like that. Like this might just be captivating the local populace, and everybody's just going to relax and party and drink too much, and eat all of the food. Then it quickly turns shape and becomes this massacre. I wasn't prepared for it.
Yeah. Well, even when the Nazis arrive in that village, they sit down at the table. They're
looking over the papers of people. Like, where are you from?
And
Who
the citizens
are
like, here's milk, or feeding them and like treating them with
respect,
right, and welcoming them with open arms and hospitality. Only to 5 minutes later, be burnt to a crisp.
Yeah.
But this idea that people can just become so convinced or convince themselves or believe so truly that there are humans that are less than human and have no problem treating people this way.
We're watching the triumph of a total war military strategy.
Right.
This is a horror story that sinks in because an innocent child learns the nature of his peculiar and terrible world.
Mm-hmm.
And we're with him the whole way through. Thanks, Ilan Klimov.
Yeah.
This is Blockbusters and Birdwalks. I'm the curator, Garrett Chaffin-Quiray.
I'm Ed Rosa, bon vivant and professional simpleton.
Boop boopity doo.